The Trumpet Daily with Stephen Flurry.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Trumpet Daily radio show. Lots to get to on today's program, including, we hope, some listener feedback. We've had quite a few emails coming in over the last few days and haven't had a chance to get through some of those. So hopefully at the end of the show, we can fill you in on what some of your fellow listeners are saying. Well, last night they had the final Democrat debate before the big primary in South Carolina, I think it is, and then Super Tuesday, that's next week. So quite a few states in play, and of course Bernie Sanders is way out front, and the others are trying to catch up to him, and they were on the attack last night, but I guess the general take from many commentators is that no one really emerged as a strong second candidate to Bernie Sanders. In fact, when you might have heard this at the top of the hour, but when you get the take of some of the commentators regarding the debate, they described it as out of control and messy and chaotic and loud and childish, argumentative, difficult, frustrating. One commentator said it was a disaster. So not a good look for the Democrats. And this week seems to be Joe Biden's last stand. He's just had gaffes all over the place over the past week. I think yesterday or the day before, he said he was running for the U.S. Senate, not president of the United States. And then he also mentioned working with Deng Xiaoping on the 2016 Paris climate change deal. The only problem is Deng died in 1997. So that was a pretty big gaffe. And then last night, he talked about gun violence causing 150 million deaths in the last 13 years. And America certainly has its problem with gun violence. There's no doubt about that. But we haven't lost half of our population in the last 13 years as a result of shootings. I think someone put it pretty good last night on Twitter, saying that the debate pretty much guaranteed President Trump's reelection. Conrad Black at American Greatness, he said that Bloomberg is a much more substantial candidate than Hillary. He's talking about who it is that could possibly go up against Donald Trump. And he says Michael Bloomberg is a much more substantial candidate than Hillary Clinton proved to be. But Trump has 10 times the stature that he had 4 years ago. And so that's what they're going up against. Now it's not just this this firebrand, this hothead that's out on the campaign trail who's willing to say anything. But now President Trump, he's got a track record that he can point to. He can point to the economy. He can point to a number of things. He's got 10 times the stature that he had 4 years ago. It says on his record, and with the Republicans rock solid behind him, he is the strongest presidential incumbent seeking re-election since Ronald Reagan, who took 49 states in 1984 against the unexceptionable Walter Mondale. It seems unlikely that anyone could ever take 49 states again, but in Conrad Black's opinion, this is the strongest presidential incumbent since 1984. That's quite a statement. And it speaks to President Trump's rising popularity, even if you have all these Democrats duking it out. And of course, as we touched on earlier this week, if in fact it is Bernie Sanders who emerges as the front runner, if he is the Democrat nominee, one would think that only helps President Trump all the more. I know President Trump's people are out there saying that if Sanders wins, he's going to be the most difficult candidate, but I'm not sure they're being completely honest about that. Speaking of elections, the Israeli election is coming up now, just in the next week or two, and incredibly, Benny Gantz is slipping in the polls. This is the fourth election in something like a year or a year and a half. And Benny Gantz, just so you're familiar with the last go-round where they pretty much finished in a tie. And when that happened, leading up to it, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he was always trailing in the polls. So the polls, the polls heading in, the same day of polls, I guess the exit polls they call them. The conservative, just like in the U.S., he's always trailing, and so I think it is pretty significant that if Bibi is nudging ahead, even in the polls, that could be a pretty good sign for Prime Minister Netanyahu's chances to hold on to his position as Prime Minister. Benny Gantz, by the way, he's also been caught up, or at least his party has been caught up in a corruption scandal. And the Attorney General, Mandelblit, he's the one that he's gone right after Netanyahu. He's indicted the sitting prime minister. He wants to take Netanyahu out right away. But he's rushed to the podium to say that now don't think that Gantz is somehow implicated by these corruption charges. And oh, by the way, we'll put it off until after the election. We don't want to interfere in the elections. Quite a different approach than with Benjamin Netanyahu, where you throw the book at him, even if he's in office, even if he's coming up to an election. But if it's Benny Gantz's party, the blue and white party, well, we just want to... The AG in Israel says we want to steer clear of that because we don't want to meddle in the election. Just like in the United States, it's completely one-sided, these investigations, these politically motivated investigations. Prime Minister Netanyahu was interviewed by radio talk show host Mark Levin on Sunday, and this is what Mr. Netanyahu said about the politicized investigations. Clip one.
The popular buzz in Israel, if it's not Netanyahu, if it's not Bibi, you don't investigate. That's not justice. That's not right. It's totally a politicized system that we can't accept, and this is something that is very dangerous for democracy. The minute you use or not use criminal investigations as a political weapon, the minute you throw false charges on one side and absolve the other side of anything, that is very dangerous for democracy. And people get it.
That's Netanyahu on Sunday, saying that the popular buzz in Israel is that if it's not Bibi, you don't investigate. Does that sound familiar? It's been so completely one-sided, these investigations. Perhaps that will change sometime soon. But you could just as well say if it's not Donald Trump, then you don't investigate. You turn a blind eye to it. He talked, the two of them, but by the way, talked about some of the staffers of Benny Gantz, how that, well, one of them used to work for the Obama administration. And these are Benny Gantz's top aides who are out there comparing Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. So these are the ones that have the ear of the one who wants to become prime minister. And Netanyahu, as you can hear in this exchange, he just is, he can't believe it. He says it's just a total fraud. They have to lie in order to try to win the election. But these are far left radicals who are maybe pretending to be moderate or even right of center. But when you look at what they're doing, when you look at the people they're surrounded by, they're coming from that same Antiochus spirit that's so strong in the United States. Here's clip 2.
You mentioned these staffers to Mr. Gantz, and I'm familiar with this too. You have two staffers who refer to our president in one way or another as Hitler,
Right.
And Mr. Gantz keeps them on board as senior advisors. You also have Obama advisors.
I've asked him to fire them, and he wouldn't.
And he wouldn't.
They're the guys who give him the lines. You know, look, I'm appearing here. There's no teleprompter. There are no notes. There's nothing. You know where the teleprompter is? Inside my brain. My experience, my convictions, my beliefs. That's my teleprompter. Okay, this guy is being fed by two people. One is an Israeli advisor called Ronen Tzur. He compared President Trump to Adolf Hitler. It's incredible. The greatest friend we've ever had in the White House, He's compared him to Adolf Hitler. The second advisor is an American advisor. It's Joel Benenson. You said you're familiar with him?
He worked for Obama.
Yeah, okay, well, it's legitimate. Okay, he worked for Obama. But he too did something which I think is illegitimate. He too compared President Trump to Adolf Hitler. So these are the two closest advisors of Benny Gantz who tell him what to say, when to say, and so on. And they're putting on an act as though they're for the Trump plan. These people who call President Trump Hitler are for President Trump's plan. Come on, give me a break. So it's one big con job. That's what it is.
That's Bibi Netanyahu on Sunday. These are the two closest advisors. They're in Benny Gantz's ears. And as Netanyahu went on to explain, that party, it stands for getting into power any way possible and then doing the opposite of the Likud party. That is their aim, and perhaps they're being exposed to some degree, just like in the United States, because as we've noted before, even in little Israel, it seems like there is a mini resurgence following in the wake of President Trump's resurgence, or the U.S. resurgence, since 2016. But as I've said too, we've got to certainly keep our eyes open to what's happening around the world. As Jesus said, watch and pray always. There certainly is a lot of internal division and sickness from head to toe, as Isaiah 1 says. And we're seeing sickness literally spread around the earth. Several reports saying that it's only a matter of time before the coronavirus spreads into the United States. Here in the UK, they're introducing all kinds of emergency measures with mass surveillance, as if we don't have enough of that here in the UK, and then all kinds of testing to go with it, in order to prevent this disease from spreading. I mentioned yesterday on the program the outbreak in Italy and Iran. Quite a few schools in Italy have been closed down. Iran is pretty much locked down, and we're getting reports that the death toll there officially is 15, but it could be quite a lot more than that, because like in China, Iran could very easily manipulate that information. They had one, I think, health official who was on TV. He was coughing away, and we since come to find out he had the coronavirus. This is an Iranian official. The deputy health minister, I think it was. Well, we've got an article coming up later today at thetrumpet.com. Brent Noctegal, our Jerusalem correspondent, and he's going to talk about just how much of a pounding Iran has taken just this year, beginning with the embassy attack that failed, and then, of course, Soleimani taken out in early January. And now you add this to the mix. In the United States, as I say, the reports, judging by some of them, they're saying, I mean, it's a huge country with more than 300 million people, and many saying it's only a matter of time. President Trump has been out there saying, we're doing just fine. We've kept it out. Everything will be okay. And of course, the people that hate him on the radical left, they're out there very skeptical and using this yet again as another opportunity to attack the president. This is the president, some comments he made yesterday, and then following that, the reaction of the MSNBC reporter. Clip 3.
You may ask about the coronavirus, which is, very well under control in our country. We have very few people with it, and the people that have it are, in all cases, I have not heard anything other. But the people are getting better. They're all getting better.
all getting better. Nothing to see here. The reality, however, is that Trump faces a situation now that he can't just witch hunt away. Politico reporting, quote, Trump's top aides faced an increasingly urgent threat Monday with potentially monumental implications. A global outbreak knocking down the U.S. economy and walloping markets in an election year, all against accusations about whether the Trump administration had mismanaged and underfunded a critical response with American lives on the line. To sum it up, not only is Donald Trump asleep at the wheel, he's driving a vehicle he's spent the better part of 3 years dismantling.
And so if the disease breaks into the U.S., there's a little bit of a sampling of what the news media coverage will be like. It's as if they're almost hoping for an outbreak just so that they can pile it on the president. Well, it's a serious problem. And of course, the Bible prophesies that it will get worse. If not this specific disease, others like it. The World Politics Review talks about this as being an outbreak, or this outbreak being a shape of things to come. It says the Wuhan coronavirus reveals how vulnerable humanity remains to virulent pathogens. A century after the devastating Spanish flu pandemic, public health officials are scrambling to prevent this latest plague from becoming another pandemic. As they do, it's worth taking a step back to consider the stubborn staying power of infectious disease. Here we are in the 21st century, 2020, all of this modern technology, all of these vaccines and such, and yet look at how that this has just rattled the whole world. And it explains in this article how that with the way people in the world today are traveling, you can see where things like this could spread like a wildfire. It says we're traveling the world in record numbers and at unprecedented speeds, potentially carrying new diseases with us. In 2017, more than 20,000 cities were connected by regular air service. And the total number of airline passengers topped 4 billion, a figure expected to double by 2037. Well, it gives some more figures about just how many people how many people are traveling, putting that together with the way that these diseases spread. When you read Revelation 6 about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and that pale horse in particular mentioned in verse 7, that pale horse and its rider symbolizing disease, the spread of disease. In the International Standard Version, it translates verse 8, I looked and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. So this is the personification of disease epidemics, sickness and disease. And your Bible says that it's going to spread over or infect a fourth part of the earth. So this coronavirus is just a drop in the bucket. It is. Revelation 6, of course, is not the only passage of Scripture where this is mentioned, disease epidemics. Jesus mentioned it in the Gospels, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. And so we are headed for a return to these medieval-like pandemics that will, in fact, kill millions of people. We'll have to wait and see how this particular disease spreads. We know we have just a little bit of time left to finish God's work, but it's going to collapse suddenly, as we've been saying. We can't be lulled to sleep by this temporary resurgence. You look at other aspects of society, of course, and whether it's in Israel, when you look at it politically, in the UK, in Israel, in the United States, they're definitely God's hand has definitely been involved in exposing the evils of the radical left. You've seen news this week, Sonia Sotomayor, the Supreme Court justice who came out with her dissent on some case the other day where she talked about how that the Supreme Court, this is one of the Supreme Court justices, she comes out and says that, well, there's too many Trump supporters on this panel. And she was alone in her dissent, by the way. This is because of the Trump administration going to the Supreme Court to try to lift these crazy injunctions that seem to be happening every week from some district court judge, usually from California, trying to thwart the president's agenda from some no-name court in the middle of nowhere. And it's happened over and over again. And the Trump administration is using its only recourse, basically. Well, if this is going to keep happening, we have to go to the Supreme Court to get this nonsense stopped. Listen to Senator Cruz yesterday in a judiciary hearing talking about just the number of injunctions, universal injunctions, aimed at stopping this president. These are injunctions coming from lower-level federal courts. Here's clip 4.
Nearly 1/3 of the nationwide injunctions issued against the Trump administration have come from courts in the state of California. 2/3 of the states, their district courts have issued a total of 0 nationwide injunctions. So you have a handful of courts that are driving this problem. But to put it in perspective, in the 8 years of the George W. Bush administration, district court issued a total of 12 universal injunctions against the Bush administration, 12 universal injunctions in 8 years. In the 8 years of the Obama administration, district courts issued 19 universal injunctions against the Obama administration. In just 3 years of the Trump administration, we have already had 55 national universal injunctions issued against the federal government. That is what has necessitated the Department of Justice going to the Supreme Court, because I believe we have a handful of judges who are operating effectively as part of the resistance movement, trying to put themselves in the way of Trump policies they happen to disagree with.
If they're in the resistance, well, they're going to do anything and everything that they can to slow down the Trump administration. Look at this judge presiding over the Roger Stone case. Here, there's all these reports, the head jury, the foreman, all of this political bias. The judge herself, of course, is politically biased. And as soon as this is pointed out, well, they just disregard it. And they barrel ahead. They sentence Stone. Who cares what a conservative might think? Who cares what's said on Fox News? Who cares if there's political bias on our side? 55 national universal injunctions in just 3 years. That's almost 3 times as many as with Barack Obama. And President Trump's not even halfway through an 8-year presidency. Far from it. We have never, ever seen anything like this in the United States of America. If you can't stop him at the ballot box, stop him in the courts. What happens when you can't stop him in the courts? Because we know from Amos 7 that God's giving this administration some favor there, at least with the higher up courts, like the Supreme Court. In fact, there was a story in the LA Times. This is just fascinating too. And of course, catches our interest all the more because we went through the Ninth Circuit in fighting for Mystery of the Ages. We're very familiar with how radically left the Ninth Circuit is. The Ninth Circuit in California. And of course, it covers a lot of states in the Southwest. I think 8 or 9 states. But they've been radically to the left since the 1970s. And it says here, when President Trump, this is from the LA Times, when President Trump ticks off his accomplishments since taking office, he frequently mentions his aggressive makeover of a key sector of the federal judiciary, the Circuit Court of Appeals, where he has appointed 51 judges to lifetime jobs in 3 years. It says, in few places has the effect been felt more powerfully than in the sprawling Ninth Circuit, which governs or covers California and 8 other states. It says here, Trump has now named 10 judges to the Ninth Circuit, more than 1/3 of its active judges, compared with 7 appointed by President Obama over 8 years. So you can see why President Trump's out there continually drawing attention to this. He, with the help of Mitch McConnell, he's appointing conservative judges right and left, and he's essentially flipped this court. This court that used to be a radical leftist judiciary. This is a federal appeals court. This is right underneath the Supreme Court level. And this has flipped from far to the left to now a conservative court. It's pretty incredible for this to just happen in 3 years' time. It says 10 new people at once sends a shockwave through the system. Among those who have caused the most consternation is Judge Daniel Collins, a former federal prosecutor and partner of a prestigious law firm. Some judges say that in the early months of his tenure, Collins has appeared oblivious to court tradition. He has sent memos at all times of the night in violation of a court rule and objected to other judges' rulings in language that some colleagues found combative. So here comes this judge, this conservative judge. He's stirring things up. He's raising red flags. He's sending out memos in the middle of the night. And these distinguished jurists, they don't like it. They don't like it. It says active judges vote on the calls behind the scenes, and the public becomes aware of a failed effort only when dissents are later filed by the judges who favored reconsideration. It says Democrat appointees still make up a majority of active judges. The number is 16-13. But it says here, of the senior judges who will be deciding cases on merits, it talks about how that in addition to the active judges, they also have judges that are on a senior status, which is basically like part-time, that still have a say on major cases. And it says that of the senior status judges, 10 are Republicans and only 3 are Democratic appointees. So here's President Trump, and he's flipped the Ninth Circuit, which for decades was known to be the home of leftist, activist judges. And we came face to face with a couple of them. We argued our case over Mystery of the Ages in front of a 3-panel court. And one of them had very sound judgment and logic when considering the arguments. And the other two, it was as if you were talking to lawyers representing the Worldwide Church of God that wanted to keep Mystery of the Ages buried forever. Well, if you, again, think about Amos 7, verses 12 and 13, where it talks about the king's court, or the house of the kingdom, as the Wycliffe commentary translates it, the house of the realm. My father made this statement. He says, this is not a religious entity. It is something else. So you know about the king's chapel. That's the religious support. But then also the king's court, or the house of the kingdom. And then my father says, I believe this non-religious entity, the kingdom's house, is referring to the United States Supreme Court. This court was designed to guard the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. In many ways, the Supreme Court is over the whole nation. Even the president is subject to it, which is exactly the type of entity that the house of the kingdom is referring to. So in just stepping back and looking at the bigger picture here, you have all of these lower-level activist judges issuing these nationwide injunctions, doing everything that they can to stop the president. They're part of the resistance, remember. And so the president, and we were introduced to some of his lawyers during the impeachment trial. He's got a good panel of attorneys himself. And they go straight to the Supreme Court and say this judgment, this injunction, this is unconstitutional. And more, the Supreme Court's ruling in the favor of the president. And that's why Sonia Sotomayor came out with her dissent this week. She is frustrated. She is frustrated that the president's attorneys keep coming to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court keeps siding with them. That's the house of the kingdom right there. Here's a presidency that has, for all of the attacks, he's got some strong support coming from the traditional Christian religion and from the house of the kingdom, and of course, from just ordinary Americans, the voters. Middle America. Victor Davis Hanson had a piece following on what was revealed, I guess it was last week or maybe the week before, those comments that Michael Bloomberg made back in 2016 in Oxford, where he talked about how easy it was to be a farmer. He said that he could teach anyone how to farm. Just put a seed in the ground and, up comes the plant. But now to function in a more difficult or challenging job in this information economy, well, then you have to have more gray matter. You have to be smarter. And so quite a few people reacted to those comments. Just couldn't believe the elitist thinking to put down the ones that put food on our tables. This is what Vice President Pence said about that, I think just yesterday, clip 5.
When some major national candidates are denigrating America's farmers. I mean, one candidate, I'm sure you all saw it, one of their other side's candidates for president said, I can teach anybody to be a farmer. He said it's a process. You dig a hole, you put a seed in, you put dirt on top, you add water, up comes corn. I have never heard a more uninformed, ignorant statement about agriculture in my life.
That's the Vice President of the United States yesterday responding to Mayor Bloomberg and what he said a few years ago. Of course, at the time that was made known, those comments, I think it was President Trump who then retweeted something that showed those comments. And I think we said last week that you can just imagine that on quite a few campaign ads going forward. But Victor Davis Hanson here says Bloomberg's apparent dismissal of rural people might seem odd given the Democrats profess allegiance with the working class or the working classes and muscular labor. But in fact, his disdain is perversely logical and indeed predictable. So they say they represent the working class. They say they represent labor. They say they represent the common man. But in fact, this kind of disdain, as Hanson brings out, it's perversely logical. It makes sense. And you can predict it. It happens every election cycle. He refers to the 2008 campaign with Barack Obama when he talked about rural voters in Pennsylvania. Obama said they get bitter, they cling to their guns or religion, or antipathy toward people who aren't like them, or anti-immigrant sentiment. And Hanson, again, this is just 12 years ago, but he reminds readers that when Obama made those comments, those remarks, back then, of course, he was running in the Democrat primary against Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton then rushed to respond, saying how elitist it was for Obama to say something like that, how out of touch it was. And Hanson said, if you remember that election cycle, Hillary drank Boilermakers, she talked guns, she went bowling out in front of the cameras. She bragged about her solid support from among the white working classes. That's 2008. Then you fast forward to 2016, and who can forget? She's out there calling the Donald Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, saying they were racist, they were sexist, they were homophobic, they were xenophobic, they were irredeemable. Yes, perversely logical and indeed predictable. It happens every election cycle. Hansen says former vice president and current presidential candidate Joe Biden said of Trump's working class voters, they're a small percentage of the American people, virulent people, some of them the dregs of society. These are people that are trying to get out and get votes from ordinary Americans, with which, if you haven't looked at an electoral college map yet, pretty much the whole nation is covered in red except for the Northeast and the Southwest, or the West Coast. And they think they're going to, I guess, increase their support by ridiculing and mocking and insulting the very people they need to get votes from. It says the disdain for the working and middle classes shown by wealthy liberals who supposedly champion labor is matched by the disdain of progressive government bureaucrats, media, and left-wing Hollywood celebrities. In one amorous exchange to his paramour, Lisa Page, fellow FBI agent and Trump hater Peter Strzok said, just went to a Southern Virginia Walmart. I could smell the Trump support. He could smell the Trump supporters at this Virginia Walmart. Well, it was just a week or two ago when, I don't think we played this clip, but we referred to it, Don Lemon on CNN with pundits Rick Wilson and Wajahat Ali, as they couldn't stop laughing at how stupid, at how idiotic, at how foolish Trump supporters are. Here's how that exchange went down. Clip 7.
Donald Trump couldn't find Ukraine on a map if you had the letter U and a picture of an actual physical crane next to it. He knows that this is, an administration defined by ignorance of the world. And so that's partly him playing to their base and playing to their audience, the credulous boomer Rube demo that backs Donald Trump, that wants to think that Donald Trump's a smart one and y'all elitists are dumb.
You elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling, even though
your math and your reading.
Yeah, you're reading, your geography, knowing other countries, sipping your latte.
All those lines on the map.
Only them elitists know where Ukraine is.
And these are the same people who wonder why Fox News, even last night for the Democrat debate, the ratings, Fox just kills in the ratings. Millions and millions tuning in to hear from anchors and commentators who don't single them out, these viewers, as being stupid. And this, Hansen brings this out. This is not unique to the Trump era. It's especially venomous and vicious during Trump's presidency. But you go back to any Republican, as far back, at least from what I can remember, for as old as I am, I remember Ronald Reagan. He was a dunce. He was an idiot. He was a fool. Sam Donaldson tried to make him out to be a fool every chance that they could get. And then you move forward to the Bushes, same thing. Sarah Palin, who can forget that? They just made her to be an absolute idiot during that campaign with John McCain. Nothing new. This is right out of the Democrat playbook, but it's especially vicious today, as you just heard there. Hansen says, why do so many liberal, this is what's interesting to me, why do so many liberal journalists, politicians, and celebrities harbor such contempt for and show such snobbery about the white, working, and often rural classes of the American heartland? As I say, these are the votes that they need. So what's driving this? What's motivating this? He says the most obvious answers are that the media, elite politicians, and government hierarchy are liberal or left-wing, and the objects of their hatred are mostly conservative. So look at the map and you see where the conservatives are. They hate the conservatives. They hate political opponents. It says, second, there's no cultural, career, or political downside in stereotyping millions of Americans as stupid, crude, and culturally repugnant. And he talks about how that if it were reversed, if you criticized the followers of Barack Obama or whatever, you'd be banned from CNN for life. Like I said yesterday, Chris Matthews, he doesn't even make this direct connection with Bernie Sanders and something that happened during the Nazi era, but he has to get up the next day and apologize immediately. Because you cannot criticize that side. Here's the point that I think is most effective from Victor Hansen's piece at National Review. He says, third, politics, academia, the media, and entertainment don't necessarily draw in particularly wise people, especially if knowledge is broadly defined as social skills, empirical education, common sense, and pragmatic experience. He's basically saying, look, he made this point on Fox, I think a week or two ago, that I've met a lot of farmers who are a lot smarter than some of these elites on either of the coasts. But he says here, according to the rules of the elementary playground, one becomes exalted by ridiculing others. High school dropouts such as Robert De Niro and Cher seem to appear sophisticated by ranting about Trump and his supposedly ignorant supporters. It makes them feel good about themselves. This takes you back to grade school tantrums. Finally, says Hansen, there is also a psychological explanation for why coastal elites negatively stereotype the churchgoers, farmers, gun owners, and Walmart shoppers of the nation's interior. He says, our elite, especially those of our white elite establishment, are not especially comfortable with either poor people or minorities, at least not in the sense of living among them, working alongside them, schooling their children with them, or marrying among them. They sense that such concrete unease, their fear and insecurity, is at odds with their well-meant desire to help the underprivileged in the abstract. Elites help square the circle by wishing to aid the other while not being anyway near the other through the use of medieval-style virtue signaling. It says, that is, they deplore white racism and privilege by attributing it to supposedly ignorant and less enlightened poor white people whose illiberality and unwokeness they can lazily stereotype as responsible for the plight of the underclass. In other words, look, we're part of the white community, and yeah, there's a lot of ignorance, a lot of white privilege, but that's among the poor or ordinary whites. But we, the elites, of course, we're woke. We know the plight of the minorities, and we're on their side. So they have to walk this fine line to get across that message, that virtue signaling, while at the same time, they're out there saying, look, we're for the working man. Well, Donald Trump came along in 2016, and he blew that argument right out of the water. Who's the president? Who's the politician today that really and truly does represent working class America? Well, look at the rallies. Just open your eyes and see who turns out. It says, our best and brightest, this is Victor Davis Hansen's conclusion, our best and brightest cannot be the good white people unless there are plenty of bad white people. Smearing the latter is a convenient and cheap way of showing abstract solidarity with the non-white. Some pretty good analysis there from Victor Davis Hansen. When we come back, we'll conclude today's program with some listener feedback that's been coming in over the last week or two. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily radio show. If you'd like to submit feedback, you can send comments to td@kpcg.fm. We'll be right back.
This is KPCG-FM, and this is the Trumpet Daily. Freedom is one of the most sought-after ideals in human history. Man's search for freedom has taken him into the fiercest of protests, struggles, revolutions, civil wars, and even world wars. Today, in the midst of free societies, many continue to fight for what they perceive as ever greater freedoms. And yet, many of these same people are actively fighting against law. Few people understand that this war against law actually undermines true freedom. To learn more, request Gerald Flurry's booklet, No Freedom Without Law. In this free booklet, you will see what the Bible says about the latter-day spirit of rebellion and lawlessness that is now so common in our nations today. Also request America Under Attack. In this booklet, you will learn more about the spirit behind this attack on law. You'll see where this is leading. Both booklets are offered freely at no cost or obligation to you. Request No Freedom Without Law and America Under Attack. Email your request to td@kpcg.fm or visit thetrumpet.com. From the Philadelphia Church of God campus in Edstone, England, this is the Trumpet Daily program with Stephen Flurry.
A few emails here from you listeners. One says, wow, another powerful, informative program. Thank you, from Tacoma, Washington, listening at 5 a.m. So they're tuning into the live broadcast at 5 a.m. I think I spoke with one of our listeners from Arizona back in October. And they said the same thing. He and his wife, they get up, they listen to the live broadcast, drink their coffee before they get on with their daily prayers and study. So great to hear from some of you way out west in the United States of America. Another one here, it says, I used to watch hours and hours of news, but never realized just what I was seeing until now. So good to hear that we've replaced this 1 hour program with very few commercials and promos. 1 hour of content that you'd have to look at probably a 3-hour broadcast somewhere else with all of the ads and commercials and infomercials in between taken out to just get the same amount of content. But of course, leaving aside the time that you're investing, of course, the content, given that it's based upon Bible prophecy, that's what makes this program unique. Another one here says, another wonderful program. A big thank you to you and your staff for all your dedication and hard work in getting the warning message out. This one here says, I'm greatly looking forward to the live broadcast this coming Sunday. And by the way, we have a live trumpet lecture this Sunday at 4 p.m. here in the UK. I guess it would be 5 p.m. on the continent in Europe. It would be 10 a.m. back in Oklahoma. Or if you go further west, I guess it would be 8 a.m. on the West Coast, 11 a.m. on the East Coast. I might have that a little bit off, but 8 or 9, I think, on the West. In any event, you figure it out. That's the Trumpet Live Lecture coming up on Sunday, and this is a listener looking forward to it. It says, in regards to the Trumpet Daily live broadcast, or the radio, it says, the show has become a necessary staple for me and should be for anyone desiring to see biblical analysis of what is taking place in the world today. It says, with the increasing revelations of where we are in time and the soon coming return of Jesus Christ, I look forward to each daily news briefing. I'm deeply thankful for the revelation that Mr. Fleury has passed down to us in this very exciting time in world history. This one here comes in from Louisiana. It says, while watching your live broadcast this morning, I started to think about Matthew 26:41, where it says, watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Listening to your morning broadcast is the only way to watch and pray, to hear the truth. Sure, we may hear bits and pieces of a partial truth, but nothing to substantiate and know God's truth. I pray for you and ask the Eternal to strengthen and to protect you. I'm so thankful for you and your voice. I've entered into my 12th year in God's family. What a blessing and relief. Another one here from Canada, and she works at a library, I believe. It says, I wanted to pass on to you that last week I processed the 1939 version, the English version of Mein Kampf, taking the Winston Churchill class and hearing the lectures lately about how drunk the British were on appeasement and mollifying Hitler really made their blindness stand out to me as Here was the very book that told them what he was going to do. It was his manifesto, and they totally ignored it. And it was available to them long before this one was published. She got the 1939 version. I think Hitler wrote it initially in 1923 or 1924. But she says here, what alarming times we live in. And all the radical left media can fixate on is taking out Donald Trump and blaming him for everything. It makes sense that things will happen suddenly and unexpectedly because they're so totally distracted and blinded by their hatred that they cannot even acknowledge what is truly dangerous in the world. It truly boggles the mind to hear the nonsense and lies that continually pour forth from any of them. They must be in captivity to the devil to lie so easily and accuse others of what they are guilty of so glibly. It definitely does not come from a sound mind. The only explanation is in America under attack. She says, finally, love the TD. I listen every day when I come home from work. So there's someone that's getting the podcast download every single day. A lot of our listeners listen in when the workday is ended. We appreciate all of them as well. Another one here says, I'm praying for the success of all the PACs and for the Eternal to guide your speaking. And then another one, such a cheerful and welcoming group. I think that's in response to the montage coming back from one of the PACs. Another one here says, listening daily to the Daily from Duggar, Indiana. Can't miss an episode. Another one here in response to Monday, the day after we got back from Ireland. It says, welcome back. Nice to see you again live. Hope you had a wonderful weekend listening from Bathurst, New Brunswick in Canada. This one in response to Friday's program, that was Mr. Loker's, Andrew Loker's message. It says, this was a very good program, Mr. Loker. You gave us inspiration, reproof, doctrine, correction, and instruction. If possible, I'd hit the like button twice. Have a peaceful, productive day. Another one, responding to the same show, said, I like the mini Bible study and the way you presented it. We'll try to read the recommended book. Personally, I believe we need stronger frightening language or examples to jar people out of their lethargy. All have been so numbed by technology and lifestyle that they cannot and will not react. This one here in response to Richard's show from last Thursday, best news in the world, thank you. And then another one says, love the news, truth from the Bible. This one comes in response to the Key of David program here in the UK version. It says, thank you for your wonderful channel. Well, we don't actually own the channel, but we do play the program on one of the CBS stations here in the UK. Another one here says, what do you say? Que pena ne esta en español. The meaning there, what a pity it's not in Spanish. Hopefully I didn't butcher the Spanish too bad there. Another one here says, God bless you in my prayers daily. Thank you and your dad for all your hard work telling us the truth. For telling us the truth. Another one, he emails here, Dear Mr. Fleury and staff, I think some promotional items from thetrumpet.com would be a good idea. I would love to buy a t-shirt or two. So we've got to get on that. That's our summer project here in just a couple of months. We'll have to get on that if we make it back to the headquarters campus for a few weeks. Another one here says, thanks for all your hard work that you and all the ministry puts in for the benefit of our church family and God's worldly family. As I said in the subject line, love you all and the work you all are doing. Thank you. And that comes from Louisiana. One final one here says, just wanted to email in and say how glad I am to have recently found you. I lost my way over the years, but have had a strong pull back to faith recently, and in that found your Trumpet Daily. Now I listen every day. I live in the U.S. and am just in disbelief of what is going on, but listening to you makes it that much easier to understand. And they write, thank you for being there. Well, we thank you, all of you, for sending in your feedback. If you'd like to submit some feedback via email, you can do so by writing us at td@kpcg.fm. You're listening to Stephen Flurry, and this is the Trumpet Daily Radio Show. We thank you for joining us on today's program, and we'll see you tomorrow.